So earlier this year, I talked about Kamaru Usman's defense of the welterweight championship of the world against Gilbert Burns. And what I said about that fight was that it was Kamaru Usman's chance to show the world if Kamaru Usman really is who Kamaru Usman has told the world that he is. And as it turned out, everybody who saw that fight got the answer to that question. And the answer is a resounding yes. And not only did he retain that championship, but he retained it in absolutely stunning fashion. He actually left Gilbert Burns in tears. Now, there's a lot of reasons why something like that happened in that particular situation, and I have to be honest with you. If anybody thought that that spoke ill of Gilbert Burns, and I think that they were mistaken. But regardless of all of that, that's all a side story. Maybe we'll talk about that at another time. Maybe the next time the Gilbert Burns fight, maybe we'll talk about it then. But right now, what we actually have to be talking about is what is going to be happening tomorrow at the Las Vegas Apex. We are talking about the World Heavyweight Championship, the heavyweight championship of the world. Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou. And what we actually have is a very similar situation to what we had with that Kamaru Usman fight. Similar in the regards of, we're going to find out if a particular fighter is actually who we are told that they are. And the difference in this case is it's a difference between a fighter telling us who we are supposed to believe that they are and the UFC marketing department telling us who we're supposed to believe that they are. So let's rewind a few months. Let's go someplace where I think that actually a lot of us probably aren't so eager to go, but let's go back into the summer of 2020. Let's go back to Stipe versus Daniel Cormier 3. The trilogy fight between the two guys that we were told that the winner of that fight was going to emerge as the undisputed greatest heavyweight in the history of UFC. And so that right there is the question that we are going to have answered tomorrow night. Is the man who won that fight, and of course that was Stipe Miocic, is he actually the greatest heavyweight of UFC history? And as it turns out that the betting lines on Saturday's fight between Stipe and Ngannou, it turns out that there are a lot of people out there who are already telling us no. No, Stipe is not who the UFC marketing department is telling us that he is. Francis Ngannou is a favorite going into this fight. It's not a big favorite. Well, Stipe is considered to be a marginal underdog going into this fight. But isn't that really something to say? That within a few months of the UFC marketing department telling us that Stipe Miocic is the greatest heavyweight of all time, suddenly there's somebody that everybody seems to think is better. Now, obviously, that is not actually a question that has been answered yet. We haven't seen this fight. We don't actually know if Francis Ngannou is a better fighter than Stipe Miocic. Well, at least we don't know if he's a better fighter now. We know that the last time they fought, it didn't go Francis's way. But that was 3.5 to 4 years ago. That was quite a long time ago. Francis Ngannou has not lost a fight since he stepped into the octagon with Stipe Miocic. And of course, the same thing is not true of Stipe. He lost his championship to Daniel Cormier. Then he got it back, and then he successfully defended it against Daniel Cormier. But if you were to look at their records in the interim alone, I suppose I can understand why somebody would think that Francis Ngannou is the better of the two fighters. And there are all kinds of other very interesting parts of this narrative. For example, there's the detail that Stipe Miocic is actually going into this fight lighter than he went into the original fight against Francis Ngannou. There's a lot of people out there who are just assuming that that doesn't bode very well for Stipe Miocic at all. Chael Sonnen recently said something, and I haven't actually confirmed whether or not this is true. It's coming from Uncle Chael. Uncle Chael would not lie to you. He wouldn't lie to you, he wouldn't lie to me. And so I do have a tendency to trust what Uncle Chael tells us. But if this one turns out to be incorrect, understand that I'm just repeating to you something that he said. And something that he said was that 95% of MMA fights are won by the person who grapples better. Not necessarily by the fighter who is the better wrestler, but by the fighter who wrestles better in a particular fight. And especially at heavyweight, where you're looking at guys who are upwards of 265 pounds, your weight becomes very, very important in that division. And there is really, in the minds of a lot of wrestlers, as they describe it, having the weight or not having the weight, there is no substitute for having that weight. It helps. It helps you when you're in that situation where you have locked up with that other wrestler and you are pushing him and you're trying to make him carry your weight. And of course it will benefit you in that particular situation when he's trying to push back, because that's more mass that he has to move. You have more inertia if you have that extra weight than what you have if you don't have it. And going into this fight, Stipe Miocic is going to have less inertia in either one of those exchanges than what he had the last time that he fought Francis Ngannou. And the last time that he fought Francis Ngannou, the way that he defeated him was through his wrestling. By taking him down and keeping him there and making sure that Francis Ngannou could not just stay on his feet and throw those bombs. And just to underscore exactly how daunting the task before Stipe Miocic is going to be, you have to consider this. The Francis Ngannou camp, they're out telling everybody that they're talking to that Francis Ngannou has drastically improved his wrestling over the last time that he fought Stipe Miocic. There's even some people in his camp that are saying that Francis Ngannou has actually fallen in love with the wrestling side of MMA. So if you take what they are telling us to the bank, there's no reason at all to expect that Stipe Miocic is going to have as easy a time taking down Francis Ngannou as he did the last time that they fought. His takedown defense is going to be better. Stipe isn't as heavy as he was the last time that they fought. And one thing that Chael keeps pointing out is that Stipe Miocic has always been a lean heavyweight. So that weight that he took off, it wasn't like it was just fat that he was carrying around. That was actually muscle. You take off 10 pounds of muscle and you're taking off that amount of strength. It raises some very serious questions about whether or not Stipe is going to be able to repeat his last performance against Francis Ngannou. And so looking ahead to tomorrow night, one thing that I'm not going to do is I am not going to try to predict a winner, mostly because I don't want to be the person that curses either fighter. I have promised that I am not going to make any more predictions, because inevitably the guy that I predict is going to win is probably going to be the guy that loses, like clockwork. So I'm going to keep my promise to not make any further predictions, but what I will talk about is an if scenario. So what if Francis Ngannou does go into that octagon tomorrow night and he finds that knockout shot, that knockout punch, the eraser, as Teddy Atlas was calling it. What if he goes in there and he finds that and he walks out of there the new heavyweight champion of the world? What does that say about the UFC heavyweight division? I think that it would say something about the heavyweight division that I've actually been saying for quite a long time. And I think that this has been going on for years. But I don't think that the UFC heavyweight division is in a very good position. Certainly not compared to, say, the lightweight division that is just riddled with stars. But the UFC, to my eye, does seem to be having some difficulty in actually building a really good heavyweight division. And I don't think that they should actually have that much difficulty in doing something like that. Especially when we consider the fact that, the light heavyweight weight limit is 205 pounds. But then when you look at the heavyweight weight limit, that's 265 pounds. There's 60 pounds of difference between a light heavyweight and a heavyweight in the UFC. There's a lot of guys that fit into that particular segment, of the roster So really, they should have less trouble finding good stars at heavyweight, not more trouble. And yet they do seem to have more trouble with it. And I can't help but wonder exactly why that is. But I do think that it does have to be said that if you're marketing anointed greatest heavyweight of all time, he can't hold on to that distinction for any more than 6 months before there's a new greatest heavyweight of all time. And I think that if Francis Ngannou beats Stipe, we're going to have to recognize that he is the greatest heavyweight of all time. I think that it says some very unflattering things about the roster of heavyweights that has preceded them. I mean, that's not to say that the heavyweight championship of the world is not a prestigious championship. It obviously is. Jon Jones obviously wants that championship for a reason. But even presuming that Jon Jones goes on to defeat whoever wins this championship fight tomorrow night, and I would have to say that his odds against Stipe Miocic are probably better than his odds against Francis Ngannou. But even presuming that he goes on and he just wins the heavyweight championship of the world, I wonder, I think this is a fair question to ask, will that division actually be any better off with Jon Jones as its champion than it was before?